Hello and welcome to Brazier with me, Mark Long, here sitting in for Colin today. And coming up in the usual fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, we have British boxing star Tyson Fury's calls on the government to introduce stronger punishments for knife crime. It follows his cousin being killed in a 10% on this. Initiatives to tackle knife crime just aren't working. More strike action. Now concerns over supply shortages as almost 2,000 members of the Unite Union walk out at the UK's biggest container port, Felixstowe. It's the latest dispute over pay. And today, barristers have voted to go on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike in England and Wales from next month. We'll be asking a barrister, Francis Hoare, if we could be on the verge of a general strike last staged in the UK in the 1920s. And as university bosses call for tuition fees to be up to £13,000 a year, we'll be debating whether a university education is still value for money. And joining us for the next few hours is barrister and legal commentator Francis Hoare. No, he's not on strike yet, we're pleased to say. First, though, the latest news headlines with Simon.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 4. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Criminal barristers in England and Wales will stage an indefinite and uninterrupted strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out in alternate weeks in a dispute with the government over jobs, pay and legal aid funding. The new and all-out industrial action will start from the 5th of September. The Ministry of Justice says more than 6,000 court hearings have been disrupted so far. UK inflation is on course to breach 18% at the start of next year due to soaring energy bills. New forecasts by economists at Citi, an investment banking firm, are warning the consumer price index inflation will reach 18.6% in January, the highest rate for almost half a century. Last month, inflation hit a new 40-year high of 10.1%. The group also predicts the energy price cap will hit £4,500 in January. The Labour leader is calling on the next Prime Minister to make insulating homes a national mission amid soaring energy bills. Sir Keir Starmer has set out plans to upgrade 19 million homes over the next decade. The party says their heat-saving project would save households £11 billion over 3 years. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has criticised Liz Truss, claiming her plans to tackle the cost of living crisis would plunge the economy into an inflation spiral. Ms Truss argues her plans will help the UK economy, but Sir Keir Starmer is urging the leadership candidates to recall Parliament to tackle the crisis.
Unless action is taken, energy bills are going to go through the roof this winter, which is why we, the Labour Party, have said we should freeze energy prices, not let those bills go up, and pay for that in part with the windfall tax on oil and gas companies. Are making huge profits. Alongside that, we need a national mission to insulate homes. That's a longer-term issue. I called for that a year ago now. If the government had done that, we'd have the best part of 2 million homes insulated. This morning I've been seeing next-generation homes with insulation built into them. So we need to freeze prices for this winter.
Sir Keir Starmer reading that. Ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone has pleaded not guilty to a charge of fraud. He's accused of allegedly failing to declare £400 million of overseas assets to the government between 2013 and 2016. The 91-year-old made his first appearance at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning after being charged last month. An 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port, Felixstowe, has entered its second day. Almost 2,000 members of Unite, including crane drivers and machine operators, are walking out in a dispute over pay. It's the first strike to disrupt the port since 1989. National Officer for Docks at the Unite, the union Robert Morton, says members want a pay increase that's relative to the company's earnings.
I don't accept that it's the unions that are inflating the profit. I accept that it's the employers that are doing that by making these profits, and good luck to them. But why not share them? Our members of Unite are so angry that they are saying enough is enough. We got you through the pandemic. This is the way you treat us now. And you should be offering an increase that is relative to the company's profits.
Downing Street says the failure of water companies to adequately reduce sewage discharges is completely unacceptable. A Number 10 spokesperson says water firms have a duty to put their customers before shareholders and that they expect urgent action or face fines. It says Environment Agency data obtained by the Liberal Democrat Party shows monitors that are used for tracking sewage being pumped into the sea are faulty or not even installed. Russia is accusing Ukraine of assassinating the daughter of one of President Vladimir Putin's top supporters. Russia's Internal Security Service, the FSB, claims a Ukrainian citizen who arrived in the country in July was behind the attack on Saturday night. Officers allege the suspect fled Russia into Estonia after Daria Dugina was killed in a car bomb on a road outside Moscow. Ukraine has denied involvement. The allegations have not yet been independently vilified. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is facing a terrorism charge over a political speech he gave at the weekend. He accused of threatening government officials about the alleged police torture of one of his aides. Hundreds of his supporters have gathered outside his home in the capital, Islamabad. Bosses at the world's second largest cinema chain, Cineworld, are considering whether to put the firm into bankruptcy. Earlier this morning, they confirmed they've looked at options for the business, which is struggling under heavy debt. Theatres around the world will remain open as usual for now. The Scottish Government is being urged to intervene in a strike being held by council staff in Edinburgh, which has left bins overflowing. The Conservatives and Liberal Democrats are both demanding action, although First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says she hopes an improved pay offer will be sufficient to end the disruption. The walkout is the first in a series of protests planned by trade unions over pay. It will continue until the end of August. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Brazier with Mark Longhurst.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. Now, the British boxing star Tyson Fury has called on the government to introduce tougher punishments for knife crime after his cousin was killed in a stabbing this weekend. The heavyweight champion has called knife crime in the UK a pandemic. Indeed, the Office for National Statistics has suggested recorded knife incidents are now up 10% across England and Wales within the last year at almost 50,000 offences. But the Ministry of Justice says that figure's up just 5% in the same period, and that's led to some questions as to whether anyone actually knows the extent of the problem. Initiatives, including knife amnesties and calls for stronger sentences, do not seem to be tackling the problem. So what is the answer? Let's start by crossing live to Wythenshawe, Manchester, where Tyson's cousin Rico Burton was stabbed on Saturday evening. Our Northwest reporter Sophie Reaper is at Egan's Boxing Academy where he trained. And Sophie, he really was a very well-known and celebrated local figure.
Yeah, he really was. At 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, police were called to Goose Green in Altrincham, Greater Manchester, after 2 reports of stabbing incidents. When they arrived, they found 31-year-old Rico Burton being treated for stab wounds alongside a 17-year-old man. Both men were taken to Manchester Royal Infirmary to be treated, where Rico sadly later died from his injuries. The 17-year-old remains in hospital in what's being described as a serious but not life-threatening condition. As you said, Rico Burton has been confirmed as the cousin of heavyweight boxer Tyson Fury, and Mr Fury has taken to social media to call on the government to increase sentencing for knife attacks. He said, "This is getting ridiculous. Anyone who carries a knife is an idiot." And as you say, both men train here at Jimmy Egan's Boxing Academy in Wythenshawe. Manchester Police have said that they've launched a murder investigation into these 2 cases, and so far a 21-year-old man and a 20-year-old man have both been arrested, one on suspicion of murder and the other one on suspicion of grievous bodily harm with intent to murder. Police are now urging anyone with any information on these 2 attacks to come forward immediately.
Sophie, as you say, 2 people arrested, so the case is active, as they say, legally. But has there been any response by the other boxers there to what's happened? Clearly they knew this man very well, and it must be very shocking for them.
Yeah, as we say, we're at the gym here where both Tyson Fury and Rico Burton used to train, and we spoke to his former coach Steve just a little while ago, who said that they're absolutely all devastated and shocked by this attack. Boxing traditionally is a sport that gets children off the street and away from things such as knife crime. So I think for them and this community, it's so important that the government and others get on top of these incidents to make sure that Rico's death isn't in vain.
Thank you very much indeed, Sophie, for updating us there in Wythenshawe. And, of course, any further details will be back to you. But let's bring in our former Detective Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police, Shabnam Chowdhury. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You, of course, will have seen many initiatives and approaches over the years. None seem to have worked if we take a look at these latest figures and this latest incident. What do you think has happened? Were they the wrong ideas, or have they not just been introduced or enforced properly?
I think there's lots of good ideas that are out there, and I think that the youth clubs, the youth services, the issues here are not the ideas so much as the resourcing. Policing has been cut, youth services have been cut, neighbourhood teams, which are the hub of policing, where they work with local communities, where they go out and they work with youth groups and so on, in order to keep young kids out of crime. And because of all these services that have been cut, this has a huge detrimental impact on policing and partnership working. But you know, my condolences to Tyson Fury, and he's one of these type of people who has a huge following, a huge platform. He comes from the boxing world, and as your colleague was just saying just now, it's services like those that have been cut to young people so that they can't go to these clubs, so that they can't go out and take up sport, because there is nowhere for them to go, and they actually end up out on the streets carrying knives and then getting involved in criminal activity and violence.
So you still see it as a social issue, then, one of social deprivation and poverty, as well as a crime issue?
Well, it's all of those combined together. If you go to some of these areas where you've got young children and you've got families that are on low incomes, both parents are working, or the single parent families, they're having to work long, hard hours. They can't keep an eye on what their children are doing. So the kids are going out. The kids feel that they're not getting what they want in terms of what some of the other children or young people have got. They get groomed by elders to go into gangs. And then once they're into that net, it's really difficult for them to get out of it. I worked at Hackney Police Station as the Detective Chief Inspector, running the gangs unit, working with local communities, working with partners, collaborating and initiating activities to get young people out and exit them from crime areas. It's very difficult. And I think added to that, you know, the government are saying it's either a 10% or a 5% increase. The fact is, it's an increase. And when you look at what's gone on in the last 2 years in terms of COVID, gangs, drugs, crime has been underground, and now people are getting revenge. They're coming out, they want their corners back, they want the areas that they police in terms of their criminal activity, and there's all this kind of activity that's going on.
Yeah, and you know, when you actually talk to the youngsters themselves, you will know that many of them just say, look, I have to carry a knife, it's for self-defence, everyone else is doing it, and it's very difficult to break that.
Very difficult, and you've got kids going to school that are carrying knives, and we're not just talking about bread knives or normal knives. You're talking about zombie-style knives and swords and axes that they're getting from somewhere online where they've got easy access to get to them, or going into shops, getting someone older for them to go and buy these knives. It's kudos, it's self-defense, and it has no... you know, it has huge impact on them, because once you pull out a knife, it's either game over for you or it's game over for the other person. And the other thing that is really important here is the courts that are not giving prison sentences for adults, for example, who have carried knives for a second occasion, when they can actually jail them, put them into prison, but they're not utilising those services. And all these people are doing are thinking, it's okay for me to carry a knife because I'm only going to get community service order, a few hours here and there, I'll go back out and I'll continue to carry that knife. And it's a vicious circle. Yeah, Shannon, a very interesting point. Thank you very much indeed for joining us with your assessment there.
Well, let's put that issue, in fact, to our guest here in the studio for the next few hours, Barrister Francis Hoare. Francis, thank you very much for being with us. When your colleagues, of course, are actually on strike. We'll come to that in a moment. But first, that issue that Shabnam raised about the prison sentences, the court sentences. You obviously will have much experience of seeing these cases come up time and time again. Is it the case that judges perhaps have been a little too lenient?
I used to practice in crime, but not for 10 years, so yeah. I'm not.
But it was obviously a problem that was there 10 years ago.
It's always been a problem. Yeah. Certainly, sentences have increased. The guidelines have generally increased, and the total sentences, the norm for knife crime has increased. That's obviously a part of the problem, is the deterrence of the sentence, but I would have thought that a bigger reason, I don't know, that you'd have to ask somebody who has an ability to look at the whole issue. Bigger issue was whether or not these young people believe that they're going to be caught, because that's the kind of deterrence that actually is not often talked about. So it's all very well to say, oh, well, sentences aren't, it's easy to say, sentences aren't high enough. But if people don't believe that they're at risk of being caught, that is a much more likely use the deterrent
issue of policing. But the fact, as well, as I was just putting out to Shabnam, that a lot of these kids are carrying them because they say, I've got to defend myself if we get into one of these tight corners. Everyone else is carrying, I've got to carry.
Yes, and I'm not entirely sure how you deal with that. That's a cultural issue within areas where knife crime is rampant, and that I'm sure has a lot to do with gangs. How do you deal with gangs? That's got to be a part of this solution.
So from what you're saying, I mean, has there not been too much of a joined-up approach then to actually acknowledge it's got to be local police forces in these particular areas? Social areas of sort of poverty and deprivation, and the legal service as well, really getting together to try and work out a joint approach?
I think the superintendent has to be right, that this is a wide issue and there are a number of different factors that go into it. So perhaps that's right. Perhaps there needs to be more of a joined-up approach, and whether or not that's government initiatives or initiatives with local authorities, I'm not entirely sure, But
clearly, it's not been answered so far. Francis, thank you for being with us this afternoon. More issues to come, because indeed we've got the latest industrial strife now. We've got the walkout of almost 2,000 workers at the UK's largest container port. That happened yesterday. For 8 days now, it could see serious disruption to the UK's supply chain of imported goods. Unite, the union, says the strike action at Felixstowe over pay conditions. The latest, indeed, of a summer of discontent, it seems, with action affecting a number of industries. Just this morning, Francis, look away now, barristers voted to go on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike in England and Wales from next month. Could we be on the verge of something akin to a general strike, something not attempted, of course, since the 1920s? Well, former Labour Party MP Stephen Pound joins us in the studio this afternoon. We won't be unkind to say because you remember the 1920s, but...
it's a distant memory.
A distant memory, yeah, indeed. But...
I was actually on strike then.
I mean, there is a parallel, joking apart, in that I seem to remember at the time it was a Baldwin Conservative government, and the miners and a lot of the industries said, you don't care about us, you're ignoring us. And that's definitely the feeling from many of the union members this time round.
What it was about in 1926 was mainly a thing called the means test. And what happened was that we were in a time of high inflation. There was also a time of a coming together. The Ramsay-MacDonald Labour government and Philip Snowden, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, had in effect were about to go into coalition with the Conservatives, which they actually did in 1931. And what happened was that benefits were cut. And they were cut to ludicrous. People used to go around in South Wales in mining villages and look at the china on the mantelpiece and say, well, that's worth £5 bob, you want to get down the... It was brutal. This is completely different. Now we've got a situation where, 23% of the workforce is unionised. And I think that we're looking at this whole thing through the wrong end of the telescope. People are looking for a pay rise because inflation is high. Yeah. Inflation is high because of energy costs, because of wage inflation, because of price inflation. If the aristocracy of Labour, the 23% of this country who is unionised, all got the pay rises, all that would do would fuel inflation. We'd be back. And what about the 70-odd% who aren't in unions? What would happen to them?
Well, that's the argument for all these people caught out, not able to get to work because the RMT has stopped the trains, many of them in private industry without perhaps union representation, or the industrial muscle to get 7 10, 12% pay increases. It does seem to be like a two-tier workforce to that degree.
Well, I would love it if I've been a trade unionist all my life, and I always will be, and I absolutely defend to my last drop of blood the right to be in a union. But I'd like to see the unions working more with the people who are on the hourly rate, who are on the, ring them up in the morning and bring them in for a job. The people who work...
Zero-hour contracts and so on.
Zero-hour contracts, people who are working in the distribution centres. Look, the unions have got money, the aristocrats have got the money at the present time. They can have a long strike. Fair play to them. But wouldn't it be marvellous to actually bring those people into the unions so we can have decent pay and conditions for everybody? And the key thing here is that if a central component of inflation is energy costs, why on earth are we simply looking to put more and more money in the pockets of the energy companies by giving more and more pay rises to enable people to pay more and more in their electricity? What we should be doing, and I needn't bring Keir Starmer into this, but I think he happens to be spot on this one, is to actually bring in a price cap as it is at the moment, so that actually takes the heat, if you pardon the expression, out.
Well, he's actually suggested this idea of putting a freeze on the price cap. But, I mean, the estimate is that could cost an extra 15 billion. Well, and the Institute of Fiscal Studies saying you can only probably get about 3.5 billion by backdating the windfall tax to January instead of May.
Well, it comes from about three different things. Firstly, you're absolutely right, backdate it to January. The second thing is the government have promised at the present time £400 to every single person, including Mick Lynch, you and me, all of us. Now, I think that seems to be a little bit odd, because that would be nothing, it'd be a drop in the ocean if the price cap goes up from 1,197 up to 4,000, 5,000, whatever it is.
Or even 6,000 by next
God forbid.
January,
God forbid. But if that happens, look, then what alternative have the unions got but to try to demand the money? But it's self-defeating.
Let's speak to someone on the front line, not quite on the picket line yet, Francis, because the barristers have now voted quite strongly. I think the vote was 79.5% to escalate, to go on strike, after you've been offered 15% pay increase. So
this only applies to criminal barristers, as I said, so I'm not speaking for myself here. I have practiced in crime for 10 years. The background to that, though, is important, and it's really unconnected to inflation, other than the fact that obviously barristers will be affected by inflation as much as anyone else. We're talking about legal aid cases. Barristers are self-employed, so they're not technically going on strike, and more than technically, they're not actually going on strike. They're refusing to take on cases. They don't have to take those cases on if they don't wish to. They may have professional obligations if they've already accepted them, and that's a matter for them and the regulatory body. But essentially, the difficulty is you have what's called, by economies, a monopsony. You have one market, one provider, the state, for legal aid cases, and they determine the price. The problem with that is that if you have, you also have competition within the bar and competition elsewhere. In that,
the various
criminal barristers, criminal barristers could stop doing crime. If the criminal barristers do crime and regulatory work or other things, they are desperately getting out of crime because it is so unaffordable to continue.
Well, can I just put this one figure I spotted? A median salary or payment, because as you say, they're self-employed, for a junior barrister, £12,700. Exactly. Is that right?
I think that's a junior criminal barrister. And that can be, so that's £12,000 after having gone through, nowadays everyone has £10,000 a year plus whatever it is to cost to live during university. You also have to pay for yourself to go to bar school and for the living expenses about that. So that
pay for your gown, your wig and the rest of it?
Yes, and in addition to that, when you're a junior barrister, you were often doing many cases which will often involve you working for up to 70 hours. So it can be, many are doing work for effectively less than minimum wage.
Is part of the mechanism what's going on, as we've been discussing elsewhere, that you feel, or that the barristers feel, they've been ignored by the government? Because I understand there have been efforts to meet with Dominic Raab for a year to discuss this as Justice Secretary, and they've not been successful.
That's correct. And the other issue, the wider public interest issue, is going back to the Tyson Fury case. You rely on a good profession to prosecute as well as defend cases, and to defend cases to the best ability that we have. One of the greatest public services we have in this country, and I would say after the defence of the realms, it's got to be the second duty of the state. If you don't have a state, then you don't have anything to go on. But within that, justice and the right to justice is an absolutely essential component. This goes back, incidentally, to the 1990s, at a time when legal aid was very generous. So the reductions in the 1990s, those haven't been replaced, and there have been a continual, real terms, decrease in pay on a number of different occasions ever since. And that, if people leave the profession, and if 50% of trials at some point were not able to continue for lack of barristers, you will not have cases like the Fury case prosecuted.
Collapse of the legal system. Yeah. Last thought to you, Stephen, for the moment on this. Clearly, whoever's going to be the new Prime Minister is going to have a very big in-tray. Industrial relations, where does that come in that in-trade, given all the other problems?
It sounds very, very highly, but it's equal with energy costs. And I think that if, as it's likely, Liz Truss does become the next Prime Minister, I think that her charm offensive, when she concentrates on the offensive rather than the charm, is not going to be very, very helpful to insulting leaders.
The human hand grenade, as Dominic Cummings described, we understand.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think there's a real problem there. I think the one thing we've got to do is to actually recognise that this country, just see it as a totality, as the whole, instead of saying this particular section, this particular special interest group have these advantages. Let's look at the country as a whole. Let's look at what's good for the whole nation. And let's actually start thinking, should electricity be run by French and German companies? Should we be paying out 95% of the money that's made by the water companies in dividends and bonuses instead of new lagoons? Things like that. We should be looking at the country. And if she does that, I mean, I'm inclined not to vote Conservative, to be perfectly honest, but if I was going to be tempted by anything, it would be a Prime Minister who actually said, look, let's for once put the country over the party and try to solve this as one nation.
Gentlemen, for the moment, thank you both very much indeed. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin this afternoon on GB News, on TV, online and digital radio. And still to come, a new report. Yes, we're on the issue. The water companies in the UK failing to monitor now the amount of sewage they're pumping into the sea at popular British seaside resorts. Research by the Liberal Democrats saying some monitoring devices had not even been installed. We'll have the thoughts of a researcher in marine pollution coming up next. We'll be back in a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very warm welcome back. You're watching and listening to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin today here on GB News. Now, water companies have been accused of failing to monitor sewage discharges at many popular British seaside resorts this summer. Data analysis showing that a quarter of sewage discharges going unchecked last year as a result of a lack of monitors or faulty systems. Many devices not even been installed or didn't work, quote, 90% of the time. Well, we're joined now by Imogen Napper, who's a postgraduate researcher in marine pollution at the University of Plymouth. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, We were hearing about the discharges last week during the thunderstorms, which I understand is actually legally allowed. But this particular problem, where they've not even got the devices installed, yet again a question about the oversight of the water companies.
Exactly. It's something that's quite concerning, that this is our natural environment, somewhere that we want to go and enjoy and have our holidays there. And I've actually been, unfortunately, involved in this, where I was surfing last year and I was caught in a sewage slick. It was brown, frothy water all around us. It felt extremely dirty. And at the time, I didn't even realise that it was sewage.
And the issue is it's not just unpleasant and not very, should we say, fragrant. I mean, we've got real public health concerns here with E. coli, I gather with hepatitis and other issues. Could anything be done to take the water companies to task on a public health aspect?
It's a well-known thing, especially when you're swimming potentially in the ocean or in these areas, that if you are exposed to sewage slick, that you may unfortunately become unwell. And due to this, we have to start raising the concern louder and louder for this to be taken more seriously. So there needs to be greater infrastructure improvements, more investment and accountability to the water companies that are unfortunately making this happen.
Yeah, there was a case a few months ago where the Environment Agency actually managed to monitor what Southern Water were doing down in Sussex and Kent, and there was a £90 million fine. But the Environment Agency said that took a huge effort to get them to court. I mean, should there be more powers for the Environment Agency?
I think that there needs to be more powers overall, and there needs to be a law making sure that this is not repeated. And it's not pointing the finger at any particular water company, but we know that the large majority that this could be happening to. So we now need to work together and as a team and as a whole planet to understand how we can try and make this better and monitor this more efficiently.
And very quickly, I mean, are we still the dirty man of Europe as far as this is concerned?
Are we the dirty man of Europe? I know that our oceans are wonderful, especially we're so lucky in the UK to have amazing coastlines. But we do know that they're being polluted, whether that by sewage or whether that by plastic. So now we have all of this information, the time is right to act.
Imogen, thank you very much indeed for joining us, a researcher in marine pollution. Let's just reflect that we've got Francis Hoare still with us here in the studio, a barrister with us for the next couple of hours. And we were touching there, Francis, on the legal sort of powers. And the judge in this particular case against Southern Water reflected that there'd been efforts really to try and hide what they'd been doing. But even though he instituted a £90 million fine, that was about as far as he could go.
Yes, well, that's obviously a huge deterrence, and I noticed that he said it had been difficult or very difficult to bring that company to court, but that you expect. It's going to be a long process. But the knowledge, whether or not a law is needed, generally speaking, when one looks at these regulatory issues, it's actually ensuring that there is sufficient enforcement of the law that we currently have that can be the most effective way of getting that getting companies to comply with their statutory duties, because obviously this fine will be for a number of very, very serious breaches of public health and regulatory offences. Yeah, because that's the issue, isn't it? It's not just the sort of regulations, as you say. It is endangering public health. If you've got E. coli and hepatitis in the water and they knowingly are releasing it onto a public beach, especially at a time at the moment, you know, when the kids are on holiday and like to go into the sea. Yes, I think you mentioned you mentioned the storm flows, and in fact, one of the big problems is that because we were so advanced in our sewage systems and having it in the Victorian era, as with the tube system too in London. That has meant the problem with that is that we've now got very, very old sewage systems. So I think London, the Victorians, when they built the sewers, built it for a population twice the size. We've now increased that. Yeah. And in fact, I remember, because I lived in Land's End near one of the major places for the London super sewer. It was extremely difficult to do it because it was so controversial, and obviously nobody wanted it in their backyard. But that illustrates what the real problem is, because the real problem is until the sewers are repaired, which will cost tens of billions of pounds, apparently, this problem will recur.
Yeah.
So it's all very well to say water companies aren't doing enough, but during those points, they won't be able to do anything.
Well, in terms of legal balance, let's just reflect. We've actually got a statement from Southern Water, a spokesman telling us our storm overflow task force is already engaged on industry-leading initiatives, and political stakeholders will play a key role in driving the partnership working to implement the kind of interventions, whether nature-based or engineering, needed to cut our reliance on storm releases. That's just in, and make of that what you will. You're with Mark Longhurst here on GB News on TV, online and digital radio. And coming up still this afternoon, the latest on the ideas to solve the cost of living crisis ahead of the looming rise in energy bills. Are they the fruits of creative thinking or just crackpot schemes? Also debating the big topic of the day as we ask, is a university education still providing value for money? The bosses are calling for tuition fees to be up to £13,000 a year. First, though, let's get you up to date with the latest news headlines with Simon.
Hello, it's 4:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Criminal barristers in England and Wales will stage an indefinite and uninterrupted strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out in alternate weeks in a dispute with the government over jobs, pay and legal aid funding. The new and all-out industrial action will start from the 5th of September. UK inflation is on course to breach 18% at the start of next year due to soaring energy bills. New forecasts by economists at Citi, an investment banking firm, are warning the consumer price index inflation will reach 18.6% in January, the highest rate for almost half a century. Last month, inflation hit a new 40-year high of 10.1%. The group also predicts the energy price cap will hit £4,500 in January. The Labour leader is calling on the next Prime Minister to make insulating homes a national mission amid the rising cost of energy. Sir Keir Starmer has set out plans to upgrade 19 million homes over the next decade. The party says their heat-saving project would save households £11 billion over 3 years. Russia is accusing Ukraine of assassinating the daughter of one of President Vladimir Putin's top supporters. The Kremlin's Internal Security Service, the FSB, claims a Ukrainian citizen was behind the attack. Daria Dugina was killed by a suspected car bomb on a road outside Moscow on Saturday night. Ukraine has denied involvement. The allegations have not yet been independently verified. The Scottish Government is being urged to intervene in a strike being held by council staff in Edinburgh, which has left bins overflowing. The Conservatives and the Lib Dems are both demanding action, although First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says she hopes the improved pay offer will be sufficient to end the disruption. The walkout is the first in a series of protests planned by trade unions over pay, which will continue until the 30th of August. England striker Ellen White is retiring from football with immediate effect. White was part of the Euro 2022 winning squad and is the Lionesses' record goalscorer. The 33-year-old said on Twitter that the decision had been one of the hardest of her life, but that it was time to watch the next generation shine. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Brazier with Mark.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin today here on GB News. Now, lots of you getting in touch with your thoughts on this issue of knife crime. Alistair first says it's a complex social issue. The media have to be more responsible in reporting, as media and moral panic can force naive youths to take up knives for protection, as he said. Society also has promoted the impression that everyone should be having what everyone else has. Samantha, meanwhile, says the answer to deterring people from knife crime is to make prison something they fear. Stop blaming lack of provision for people's bad behaviour. Stop excusing people. Everybody has a mind of their own. Let them take some personal responsibility for their actions. Phil then saying that the decision by barristers to go on indefinite uninterrupted strike, perhaps we would encourage immigration lawyers to strike, or is it too lucrative not to? Ouch. James, meanwhile, saying about the barristers' decision, why are these barristers not being called out as another bunch of left-wing angry people? Get to work. Francis is not saying anything. Anyway, keep the views coming in and we'll reflect them throughout the afternoon. And more views as ever here on GB News. Now, the clock is ticking with the energy price cap for this October being announced on Friday, remember, by Ofgem. Various analysts settling on eye-watering figures, most of them well over £3,500. And to add yet more misery to this latest forecast, inflation could hit 18.6% by next year, says Citibank. Yet despite the imminent financial cliff face, still no detailed plans, it seems, from the government as to how or when they are going to help us, as Truss and Sunak continue to slug it out. Now, Kwasi Kwarteng, widely tipped to be Truss's Chancellor, if she's successful, says help is on the way, but so far his cavalry haven't come over the hill. So, what to do? Well, Keir Starmer and Labour shot to the lead in the opinion polls by announcing their plan for a freeze on the energy prices. But they estimated it would cost an extra £15 billion, but only £3.5 would be coming from their plan to backdate the windfall tax from May to January. Indeed, the Institute of Fiscal Studies warns much of the gap will then have to come from more borrowing at a time, remember, when government debt is already at £2.4 trillion. So perhaps not the most prudent of solutions, if you remember Gordon Brown. Meanwhile, strike action spreading, as we said, from workers in the ports to the courtroom, becoming increasingly frustrated, it seems, at a lack of government action or even empathy, perhaps. Britain's sharpest political and financial minds have been trying to find a way out of the morass. And often, where there's a will, there is a way. But when does creative thinking become a crackpot scheme? And everyone, in Michael Gove's parlance, takes a holiday from reality. Well, the latest wheeze from the Treasury is for GPs to write prescriptions for money off energy bills. Yes, that's right, not a happy pill, but a happy bill. A senior government source said it was something they were interested in looking at. Maybe as payback after the NHS Confederation rocked the boat by warning the UK was facing a humanitarian crisis over the cost of living. Well, Labour said the prescription idea showed the government had lost the plot and hadn't a clue about the level of pressure on the NHS. As for the doctors, they seem so nonplussed rather by the idea they haven't even bothered to react to it, if, of course, you could get an appointment to actually ask them. So, yet again, we may have to turn to Britain's businessmen and women, those who daily have to balance the books, to come up with some sort of scheme that works. Iceland, remember the frozen food chain, already helping out with a range of £1 products to help with basic food staples. Well, now they've introduced their own interest-free loan scheme, the Food Club Card. They hope it will help to break the cycle of food poverty in Britain. It's been trialled regionally before being introduced across the country. Small loans on a card of between £25 and £100 to cover the shopping bill when things are tight, and then paid back, but with 0% interest. It's so far received a 95% approval rating from those using it. So maybe Liz Truss should consider freezing out Kwasi Kwarteng and installing Iceland's Managing Director Richard Walker in number 11. A 95% approval rating might be rather useful in the months ahead. Well, Francis is still with us, a barrister, of course, who isn't on strike because, as you were saying, you're not in the criminal practice at the moment. I mean, just to explain very quickly, I mean, there are those barristers who are doing very nicely in the commercial and corporate sector, but it's the criminal aspect of legal aid and what they get for appearing in court that's the issue at the moment.
Yes, exactly. And to give an example, the fee for an appearance was, for many years, £46. That might be the only appearance the barrister had. I think now it's largely gone up to £100. But out of that, a barrister will often have to pay their travel for it. And then there will be days when they don't get any work at all. And the other point to remember is that because barristers are self-employed and the courts weren't sitting, and most of them were not getting any form of support from the government, or a large amount of them weren't, their fees went down by 23% in the lockdown/pandemic period.
So all this, you know, the energy and the cost of living, this is really going to hit them as well. They're not sort of fairly well cushioned and should we say, privileged people, as some might imagine.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Either because they're very junior and receiving very little, or those who are receiving more because they're more senior will more likely to have families and mortgages.
And many are having to live in London because many of the major courts are in London.
Yeah. I think 60% or so of the bar is in London.
Do you think this is going to get sorted soon, or probably after a new government's put in place?
Well, I'm sure it'll be after a new government is put in place. Whether we have a new chancellor or not, probably the decision would have to be made by the Treasury, even if it's an individual matter, and even if the budget could be balanced differently. And the Treasury just has to appreciate: are you going to support an essential public service and an
law and order
part of the? It's not only law and order, but also justice and justice under the law and the rule of law.
Yeah. Francis, thank you for being with us. More, of course, to come from you throughout the afternoon, but it's time now for our debate this hour, higher education, where bosses have been recommending that university tuition fees should rise up to £13,000 a year, more than a junior barrister earns, just to ensure that more British students can be offered places. In the past 5 years, remember, the number of international students at UK universities increasing by 40%, and that's due to the higher £24,000 fee that they can be charged. So in light of a possible rise in the cost of higher education, we're asking, is university actually good value for money? Do you get an education that's worth it? We're joined by the director of the Orthodox Conservatives think tank, Joseph Robertson, and maths teacher and author, Bobby Seagull. Thank you both indeed for joining us. And I guess, Joseph, first to you, these are questions that a lot of students who've just finished their courses will be asking as well, bearing in mind they're paying, 6.6% interest on their student loan at the moment.
Well, absolutely. And I think there's two things to consider here. The first is that fees are going up disproportionately, as the job market doesn't go up. So you're paying out more for the education that you earn, and you're receiving less in return, especially with inflation now hitting. So I think there's two things to consider really in the long run. One, are we giving the quality and the value that students are paying for? Is there a disproportionate number of courses which perhaps don't give you the value in the long run? Should we be cutting back and looking more at quality in education? And also, what can we do about those students who are struggling? In my parents' day, not that long ago, education was free in this country, in the vast majority of places in higher education. So what can we do to return to that? Why would it not seem regressive as a society to have to pay for what technically we need in the labour force, which is educated minds. And then secondly, also to see what we're doing in terms of quality of education rather than just focusing on the mercenary side.
Bobby, is that the problem, that they're no longer places of learning? They're actually businesses, effectively, many of them?
Of course, again, as a teacher, in fact, next week we see our students again back from year 7. I always think with my students, when they first join secondary school, I always want everyone to have the aspiration of going to university because, again, I've been to university. I know it's a place where I develop myself, not just academically, intellectually, but socially as well. But the reality is universities do have a cost. They've been charging £9,000 for the last 10 years. So they've frozen those fees. So they're obviously thinking, we need to make sure that the fees that we charge reflect the actual cost of delivering an education to young people. But at some stage, there comes a point where a young person thinks, actually, sir, I'm put off going to universities. I think it's too expensive. And that's where we have to be really careful, because if university puts off people from disadvantaged backgrounds who've got the capability of going to university, then I think there's something seriously going wrong.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are talking about the aspect of getting industry to pay for taking you through your courses. And of course, that happens with a lot of people who go into apprenticeships and so on. I mean, could we actually move that structure into universities away from the workplace?
I think absolutely. In fact, on Saturday, I was on Alistair Stewart's show with a wonderful young business person called Sian, and she had actually done something called a degree apprenticeship. And obviously, most people, when they think of university, think of the traditional A-levels, go straight to an undergraduate academic degree, whereas her degree was actually one where she was working and learning at the same time. But again, with the issue with this was, with UCAS, when you apply as a normal student, you apply and you send it off to 4 or 5 universities. Whereas with her, she had to apply to each specific business separately for this degree apprenticeship. So the reality is, our ministers, our government, are not treating these other routes into education with the same respect that they do for normal undergraduate degrees.
Right, OK. Well, so much for a knowledge-based economy. Well, Joseph, the other issue is, of course, I think £24,000, as we said, that they can charge for international students. Has that skewed the whole sort of issue in that the universities argue they've got to be able now to compete on an international level?
Well, I think the issue really is that we are devaluing the word degree. What my colleague has just described there really in the olden days used to be called apprenticeships. And I think we should be seeing a return to a division between what are actually labour skills and what are intellectual and academic skills. If we're going to hand out degrees like candy, what's the point of differentiating between the academia and the workplace? I think some people, myself included, found great value in actually going and working straight after school before going back to do a degree. And you get the best of both worlds. You actually find that you have the applicative ability when you go back to university in terms of discipline, and you discover a passion for academia at the same time. I don't think we should be conflating the two.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. What does it make a sort of gap year compulsory, in other words?
Absolutely. I think everyone should have at least a year of work after school, because then you get to see the real world. A lot of the problem with a lot of our politicians is that it's becoming professional class to go into politics as opposed to actually having real world experience. And I think the same thing is absolutely true in academia, where we're seeing professional academics who have never done a day's work in their life and have sort of drifted along from school to academia without ever really experiencing the real world. And that might be fine for some theoretical subjects, but not for the workplace.
Bobby, let's put that back to you. No experience of the real world.
To be honest, again, if you're an academic studying Jane Austen's literature or theoretical mathematics, I can assume, the pattern is GCSEs, A-levels, university, then maybe become an academic. And that is a path for some people. But the reality is, if as a country we are going to be financing education, subsidizing it, because the £9,000 a year currently, even £13,000 probably doesn't cover all the cost of university, we need to make sure that universities provide benefit to society. We need academics, but we also need people at universities that go on to provide other economic value to society, be it as doctors, be it as engineers, be it as teachers. So universities really need to show that they can provide real economic benefit to society.
Well, we'll see what emerges, but that's a lot of money, isn't it? £13,000. But thank you very much indeed for both of you and your views this afternoon here on Brazier. Thanks very much. quick thought from Francis, because obviously legal profession, you have, 7 years you have to go through, more or less?
No, in America, probably, they have famously long degrees and qualifications. No, it's 3 years plus a year at bar school plus a year of pupillage, which is generally, well, it does have to be paid nowadays.
And then you can earn the princely sum of £12,700 at the end of that. OK, it's time for 5 at 5 as we discuss 5 things you need to know before 5 o'clock. At 5, GPs set to start prescribing walking outdoors and cycling lessons as part of reforms to improve the physical health of patients. It's a new £12 million scheme to run until 2025. That's a lot of running in 11 areas across the UK. At 4, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, saying Facebook and Instagram would be guilty of a grotesque betrayal of children if the platforms roll out new encrypted messaging systems which would see messages accessed and read only by the sender and recipient. Meta, who own the platform, say it's focused on solutions that do not require the intrusive scanning of people's private conversations. At 3, new figures suggesting 9 in 10 councils now employing private enforcement companies on a pay-per-fine agreement. Officers handing out fixed penalty notices for offences such as dropping rubbish, walking your dog on the beach and feeding the birds, actually earning more money by issuing more fines. At 2, a stand-up comedian who works part-time as a care worker has won the best joke at the Edinburgh Fringe for the second time. Masai Graham getting the backing of 52%. Stand by, here it is. I tried to steal spaghetti from the shop, but the female guard saw me and I couldn't get pasta. The runner-up with 37%, Mark Simmons, for his joke, did you know if you get pregnant in the Amazon, it's a next-day delivery? And at 1, a statistician has calculated the exact formula for predicting the chances and timing of children throwing a tantrum in the back of a car during a long journey. No, this isn't a joke. Dr. James Hine from Nottingham Trent University found that within 70 minutes, children will complain on the car journey, asking an average of 4 times. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Yes, we are. Those are the 5 things you might want to know before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Francis, I dare say there are quite a few jokes going around the courtroom. I didn't actually think those were particularly funny, did you?
Especially not the pasta one.
Yeah. But, I mean, does it have to be corny to work? Is that the point of it, I guess?
Yes.
Corny pasta? No. No. Anyway, thank you very much for being with us. Let's take a look at some of the emails that you've been sending us coming in with all those issues. Sewage in the sea particularly. The owners of the water company, says Pamela, should be arrested for dereliction of duty. And also, I think, talking about, if I can just find where she's... let us know. No, that's disappeared. Sorry about that, Pamela. We'll try and get that back to you and see what you've got to say on that, because I'm sure it was very... Well, there we go. We got it back. We should threaten to put them in prison unless they sort out the sewage problem, which is killing our river and sea life urgently. And we can go on to what Mel says. The water company bosses should be sacked. I think we ought to confiscate their corporate profits and feed it into a nationalised overhaul. While Ronnie says MPs voting to allow dumping of sewage in the rivers and sea is just appalling. I don't think this would have happened when we were in the EU. Controversial point. As we were asking, are we actually the dirty man of Europe? Probably. You're with Mark Longhurst, standing in for Colin here on GB News this afternoon. Plenty more to come in the next hour. We'll be back in a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin today. Coming up live at 5, British boxing star Tyson Fury calling on the government to introduce stronger punishments for knife crime after his cousin was killed in a stabbing this weekend. Knife crime up by 10% on this time last year in England and Wales. Fury has called it a pandemic. Are we seeing more evidence that the current initiatives to tackle knife crime just aren't working? Whilst knife crime rises and conviction rates slump, us police officers have been filmed taking a break from tackling crime, dancing instead. Lincolnshire police criticised by local people after this video of officers doing the Macarena dance during a Pride celebration was posted online. We're asking, are our police officers taking their job seriously enough, or is it just good community relations? And as that joke about pasta takes top prize at the Edinburgh Fringe, we want to hear your best one-liners. Get in touch, email us gbviews@gbnews.uk. And joining us for the next hour, don't forget Barrister and legal commentator Francis Hoare. And yes, we'll be asking what his best or worst joke is as well. First though, let's get the latest news headlines with Simon.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 5 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Criminal barristers in England and Wales will stage an indefinite and uninterrupted strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out in alternate weeks in a dispute with the government over jobs, pay and legal aid funding. The new and all-out industrial action will start from the 5th of September. The Ministry of Justice says more than 6,000 court hearings have been disrupted so far. UK inflation is on course to breach 18% at the start of next year due to soaring energy bills. New forecasts by economists at Citi, an investment banking firm, are warning the consumer price index inflation will reach 18.6% in January, the highest rate for almost half a century. Last month, inflation hit a new 40-year high of 10.1%. The group also predicts the energy price cap will hit £4,500 in January. The Labour leader is calling on the next Prime Minister to make insulating homes a national mission amid soaring energy bills. Sir Keir Starmer has set out plans to upgrade 19 million homes over the next decade. The party says their heat-saving project would save households £11 billion over 3 years. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has criticised Liz Truss, claiming her plans to tackle the cost of living crisis could plunge the economy into an inflation spiral. Ms Truss argues her plans will help the UK economy, but Sir Keir Starmer is urging the leadership candidates to recall Parliament to tackle the crisis.
Unless action is taken, energy bills are going to go through the roof this winter, which is why we, the Labour Party, have said we should freeze energy prices, not let those bills go up, and pay for that in part with the windfall tax on oil and gas companies are making huge, huge profits. Alongside that, we need a national mission to insulate homes. That's a longer-term issue. I called for that a year ago now. If the government had done that, we'd have the best part of 2 million homes insulated. This morning I've been seeing next-generation homes with insulation built into them. So we need to freeze prices for this winter.
Sir Keir Starmer there. Ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone has pleaded not guilty to a charge of fraud. He's accused of allegedly failing to declare £400 million of overseas assets to the government between 2013 and 2016. The 91-year-old made his first appearance at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning after being charged last month. An 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port, Felixstowe, has entered its second day. Almost 2,000 members of Unite, including crane drivers and machine operators, are walking out in a dispute over pay. It's the first strike to disrupt the port since 1989. National Officer for Docks at Unite, Robert Morton, says members want a pay increase that's relative to the company's earnings.
I don't accept that it's the unions that are inflating the profit. I accept that it's the employers that are doing that by making these profits, and good luck to them. But why not share them? Our members of Unite are so angry that they are saying enough is enough. We got you through the pandemic. This is the way you treat us now. And you should be offering an increase that is relative to the company's profits.
Downing Street says the failure of water companies to adequately reduce sewage discharges is completely unacceptable. A Number 10 spokesperson says water firms have a duty to put their customers before shareholders and that they expect urgent action or face fines. It says Environment Agency data obtained by the Liberal Democrat Party shows monitors that are used for tracking sewage being pumped into the sea are faulty or even not installed. Russia is accusing Ukraine of assassinating the daughter of one of President Vladimir Putin's top supporters. Russia's Internal Security Service, the FSB, claims a Ukrainian citizen who arrived in the country in July was behind the attack on Saturday night. Officers allege the suspect fled Russia into Estonia after Daria Dugina was killed in a car bomb on a road outside Moscow. Ukraine has denied involvement. The allegations have not yet been independently verified. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is facing a terrorism charge over a political speech he gave at the weekend. He accused the threatening government officials about the alleged police torture of one of his aides. Hundreds of his supporters have gathered outside his home in the capital of Islamabad. And the England striker Ellen White has announced that she is retiring from football with immediate effect. White was part of the Euro 2022 winning squad and is the Lionesses' record goalscorer. The 33-year-old said on Twitter that the decision had been one of the hardest of her life, but it was time to watch the next generation shine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Brazier with Mark.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. So, British boxing star Tyson Fury has called on the government to introduce tougher punishments for knife crime. It follows his cousin being killed in a stabbing this weekend. The heavyweight champion has called knife crime now in the UK a pandemic. Indeed, the Office for National Statistics has suggested recorded knife incidents are up 10% across England and Wales within the last year, with almost 50,000 offences. But the Ministry of Justice claims that figure is up just 5% in the same period, leading some to question whether anyone actually knows the extent of the problem. Initiatives including knife amnesties and calls for stronger sentences don't seem to be tackling the problem. So what is the answer? Well, Julie Taylor's grandson Liam Taylor was killed back in January 2020 after being stabbed outside a pub at the age of just 19. Julie joins us now. Julie, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. And we must reflect, I guess, every time these incidents happen, it must bring it back to you. And that phrase we hear all the time, a senseless killing.
Yes, of course it does. It's every day, isn't it? And I think the figures are much higher than that. I think that so many things aren't being reported. I think that some knife crime is going out as an assault and things like that. They want to keep the numbers down. They don't want to scare the public, and the public's should be the safe priority. Why aren't the government looking after us?
Other families affected, you start campaigning then for efforts to try and stop knife crime. What were you looking for the government to do, and what was the reaction that you got indeed?
I personally met with Priti Patel, who I think is wonderful. I think if she was a lot higher up, we'd get a lot more done with her stop and search powers and everything like that. She's really good. I've got a lot of faith in that lady. But as you say, I've met at least 50 families through losing Liam who have all lost a child, not just through knife crime. You know, they're shooting each other now. There's so much violent crime out there. And the sentencing is absolutely ridiculous, so you're getting 13, 14, 15-year-olds, younger kids than that, going to school with knives and things like that. Nothing's being done. It's sort of a smack on the wrist. Let's be a good boy or girl. Let's not do this again. Let's, be good. But it doesn't happen. In Liam's case alone, and I know many families, the perpetrator had already been to court, was a known knife carrier, had stabbed people before, and they're being sent away, go away, let's let probation, who, in my personal opinion, are a waste of space, tell you what to do. So I've gone out of my way to speak to people that go to probation. They all tell me the same things. We just tell them what they want to hear and they leave us alone, and we get on with doing what we want to do. Many people like...
Yeah, you see deterrence then as the real key to this?
The deterrent, yes. So myself and lots of other people privately fund ourselves. We go into schools, we go into clubs, we fundraise for life-saving equipment, and we do everything we possibly can. And we are making a tiny, tiny, tiny difference. Not a difference to be proud enough of, but we're all doing our bit for the right reasons. But the deterrent is, let's just kill someone. Oh, we'll be going to prison for 8 or 9 years. We'll be out in 6. Let's get these sentences. We all want the same thing. We all want life for life. Put them in a prison for life. Once they've done this, why should they have the right to a life? Why should they be allowed televisions, mobile phones, visitors? If I truly believe that if you take away all those privileges, they would definitely think more and think, oh, I don't want to lose my entire life. I don't want to lose my family. They don't care that they've destroyed our families.
Yeah.
And it's every single day, isn't it?
And what about the sentence? Yeah. What about the sentence then for actually carrying a knife, even if they haven't done anything with it?
Exactly. They go to court and you read the same thing day in, day out. There was something on the internet a couple of days ago. A judge has said, oh, this young lad is going to uni. I don't want to ruin his life. So just sort of hop along and don't do it again, son. He's running around in a gang with a machete. They should go to prison for a minimum of 4 years. Then they should come out and be on a rehab program for 5 years. There is money out there. Everyone pleads poverty, but there's money somewhere to find this. So if they're caught in that 5 years, go back to prison. Do these. Let's get them back in sort of army camps. Let's get them working. Let's get them doing something that keeps them occupied, because it's getting worse day by day. And these wretched shops that are selling with all these knives and there's just so many petitions out there that even I'm losing the will for it now. There's petitions not to sell machetes. Well, who wants to buy a machete online? Well, there's no reason to buy a machete. There's only one reason. They want to carry that around.
Yeah, and what about the influence then of these gangs, which you mentioned, not individuals such, but once they get into a gang, then obviously that changes the parameters of everything.
Of course it does. It's very difficult for them to get out. I can see each side. I try very hard to understand. I don't condone it, but there is help out there. Everybody knows right from wrong. So it's down to the person that picks up that knife in the first place. They know they shouldn't be stabbing anybody. And when they stab, they're not thinking, I won't stab there because it's the heart, or I won't stab there. They don't know where they're stabbing. They just stab, and it's 90%. It's too late. They've killed somebody. And they've just ruined our families and their own families. There's got to be more help out there. We need more youth clubs. We need more people going into schools. That's definitely a thing. Start really young and have people like me who go in and tell Liam's story. And I've had kids and teachers in tears, and I think that's what we need to do. And it's a little bit of a deterrent, isn't it?
Julie, thank you very much indeed for your point of view and joining us and bringing us your story. And good luck, of course, with your continued campaigning. But thanks very much for joining us on GB News.
And thank you for highlighting it again.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's just get the views of Barrister Francis Hoy, who's with us here in the studio this afternoon. And you realise the human cost of all this. When you talk about the statistics, you just hear one story and what it does to people. I mean, is there an acknowledgement within the legal profession that perhaps some of those sentences, some of those deterrents aren't strong enough?
As I said earlier, I think part of it is the knowledge of youths who have knives that they're going to be caught, but in relation to sentences, the sentences have increased, guidelines have increased. Sentences for life, the minimum period, the standard minimum period went up from 10 to 15 years, and that's before parole is even considered.
But then you have to prove intent then, don't you, to get that sort of sentence?
Yeah, well, that's murder, so that is if somebody has intent to cause GBH. And then one completely understands the reason why Julie will want the highest deterrence, but and penalties for murder. But one looks at this in the round and has to look at murder across the board and have some form of standard that balances because of course the use of a knife is one factor that will of course be it's unlikely and realistically to be an aggravating feature because people will be murdered one way or another. I mean, it's how somebody is murdered, but the features of the crime are critical to determining the sentence. Who the victim is, the state of mind of the perpetrator, their criminal background, and so on. Those are all important factors.
And whether they believe they were doing actually in defence. You know, this issue about we're all carrying knives. I carry a knife so that I can defend myself, and so on, with the gang situation. But I mean, the other aspect is the weapons themselves. And Julie was talking about machetes and these so-called zombie knives. I mean, it seems incredible that they're able to get them so easily. But is there a case of actually trying to impose some kind of control, legal control, on the design and the makeup of knives that we can actually go out and get hold of?
Well, if there is, I'm not entirely sure to what extent the knives that we're looking at the moment are legal or not legal. And if some of those are not legal, it's difficult to see how you can justify owning any of those unless perhaps you were in a film or something of that nature. Military uses, if they actually have military uses. But Stephen Pound, incidentally, who was here with us, was talking to us afterwards, the Labour MP, and he was suggesting you remove the point and you statutorily prevent people, other than for perhaps in specialist cooking equipment, having points at the end of knives. And he'd spoken to a pathologist who was saying that a lot of deaths could be avoided if you do that simple measure, because it may well. So
it's not the blade of the knife; it's the point of the knife that causes damage.
This is coming third hand via Stephen Pound from a pathologist, but that does show that there are measures that can be done potentially that would be easy and quick to do that may make a difference even to some lives, even if that made a difference to a handful of lives. It would be.
Indeed, one is enough. Yeah, Francis, thank you very much for the moment. Let's. Move on to continued industrial unrest. The walkout of almost 2,000 workers at the UK's largest container port could see some serious disruption to Britain's supply chain of imported goods. Now, the Unite Union says the strike action at Felixstowe is over pay conditions and will last 8 days, the latest in a summer of discontent, with action affecting a number of industries. Indeed, just this morning, as we've been discussing, barristers voting to go on indefinite, uninterrupted strike in England and Wales from next month. Could we be on the verge of a general strike, something that's not been seen since the 1920s? Alan Jones, the veteran industrial correspondent for PA Media. Alan, not going quite as far back as 1926, of course, but it's interesting that there's much talk about this spreading now even to the courtroom and barristers.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is getting quite big now. You know, I've been covering industrial disputes for decades, really. Yes, there won't be a general strike. The TUC won't call a general strike, but in a way, they don't have to now. There's so many unions going on strike, so many unions balloting for strikes. And there's some big ones coming down the line. It's entirely possible that nurses, teachers, civil servants might be on strike later on in October. So this isn't just something that's going to end in the summer. It's continuing. And as you just said, you know, barristers going on an all-out strike of barristers. Who would have predicted that? Nobody. I certainly wouldn't. Yeah. So yes, it's looking very big to me. This is one of those moments where you think, wow, you know, it's almost a moment in history, I think.
And what are you detecting? Is there any kind of coordination behind the scenes with unions, or is it just frustration that people can't keep up with the cost of living increase?
Yeah, it's not being coordinated. I mean, the thing that is coordinating is the rate of inflation now. You know, rate of inflation is almost out of control. We're already up to double figures. There's all kinds of predictions today that it's going to go up to 15, 16, 17%. That is what's driving it. Unions are obviously trying to get pay rises for their members as close as they can to the rate of inflation. They've always done that. And inflation is just racing away. So most of these disputes now are purely about pay. Some of them are about terms and conditions as well. It sounds a bit of a dry term, but it's really important that people get paid overtime, days off, all the kind of shift allowances. Those are the kind of things that are being discussed on the railways, for example, and possibly at Royal Mail. But no, it's pay. It's pay, inflation. Those are the things that's driving these strikes.
And is there an element now of a two-tier workforce? We know that union membership has dropped. There are many of those, particularly in the private sector, of course, that don't have any kind of union membership and haven't got the industrial muscle to get these sorts of pay deals through.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. A lot of these big disputes involve public sector workers. But a growing number of disputes are now involving workers at private companies. So, for example, Unite, the union which is organising the strikes at Felixstowe this week, they won some really big pay rises for bus drivers at private companies. Some of the other big unions, GMB, they're similarly winning big pay rises for refuse collectors working for private companies. So it's not just public sector now. It's the big ones are public sector, but a growing number of these settlements, anyway, recent settlements involve private sector workers.
Alan, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for bringing us your expert analysis there. Alan Jones, industrial correspondent for PA Media. Let's turn back to Francis, still with us in the studio. Francis Hoare, barrister, though you're making it very plain you're not in the criminal part of practice, which is where people are really sort of hurting at the moment, because you were saying that it's because of the legal aid. But do you think that there will be other lawyers coming out in support of them? Some lawyers in the commercial and corporate division doing quite nicely. They get lots of money per hour. Could it get that bitter that it spreads?
No, because as I said, barristers are self-employed and they will take on cases that they're paid for. I mean, there's no strike in the legal sense.
They're just withdrawing their services.
They're just not accepting instructions. So it's very different to the other types of measures that you're seeing. I think I did read that in Felixstowe, they have actually, for context, been offered 7% and asked to sit down at the table with the port authorities. So I think there is a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I think they're looking at maybe a 10% deal as probably being something they might settle for. And obviously the Felixstowe port does quite nicely. I think 60-something million in profits last year, 90 million paid to shareholders. That's not the sort of money that you've got available in legal aid at the moment to pay barristers. Well, yeah, different scales, obviously, but no, not potentially not. What about the bitterness, though? I mean, we spoke to Alan about people getting really fed up. I mean, does this spread across all sort of sectors, that when you get really fed up because you can't make ends meet, it doesn't matter who you are or who you work for, you reach the end of your tether? Well, as Alan said, the key here is inflation, and it's no surprise, I suppose, that the last period of widespread industrial action was 1970s, and that was a period of runaway inflation. Well, frankly, I've been banging this drum for 2.5 years, and I'm going to carry on doing it. If we decide to go into an unprecedented lockdown of the economy and we increase our debt by 500 billion, billion. If we increase the money supply to an incontinent extent in that 2-year period, which we did, then it is very unsurprising that we're going to have these forms of this level of inflation. The other point I'd make is that one of the key problems with energy, which is behind a lot of the inflationary problems, is that countries providing energy were providing a lot less in the international lockdowns, and as a result are taking longer to pipe the pumps. And obviously there's another international issue, which is the Saudis and other oil-producing nations are doing what they love doing, which is restricting the supply. So you increase the amount. And if the Saudis started pumping the oil, a lot of this problem, not all of it, of course, but yeah, I mean that's interesting, because obviously the cost of Brent crude has actually come down. So the petrol prices are coming down slightly. It's the natural gas, obviously, from Russia that's the particular problem. And I guess that's international geopolitics, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and there's obviously Ukraine in the background there. But don't forget, the lockdown is a huge reason for this, and if people really want to look back on that, knowing the sort of harms that many of us predicted at the time from the very beginning, they really need to at least recognise and own the fact that they're responsible.
That's the price we're paying for it. Yeah, good point. Francis, thank you for that. Stay with us. Lots of you be getting in touch too with your thoughts on knife crime we've just been discussing earlier. This is Sean, who says the UK police should have stronger stop and search powers to preempt these vicious crimes. Our police should be proactive, not apologetic. Liz says police should not have to deal with adolescents carrying knives. Their parents should be dealing with them. Parents have a responsibility. Why do they have children if they're not going to be responsible for them? Sarge says governments have cut local youth clubs, young people's participation in local action, which were all designed to keep them away from gangs. Knife crime is worse as a result. Keep your views coming. As ever, GBNews at GBViews at gbnews.uk will keep you updated with what you've got to say. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, on GB News on TV, online and digital radio. Still to come. Well, as the knife crime rises and conviction rates slump to new lows, are police officers filmed taking a break from tackling crime and dancing the Macarena. Lincolnshire police now criticised by local people after this video of officers dancing during a Pride celebration was posted online. We'll be asking, are our police taking their job seriously enough, or is it just enlightened community relations? More in a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very warm welcome back. You're watching and listening to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in today for Colin here on GB News. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your jokes too this afternoon. It follows the quip about pasta that won Best Joke at the Edinburgh Fringe. I won't repeat it because it's not very good, but yours actually aren't too bad at all. Ian sent this in. The people of Dubai don't like the Flintstones, but the people of Abu Dhabi do. Grant, did you hear the one about the painter and the decorator? They went missing. Apparently he vanished. Why don't sharks eat lawyers, says John. Professional courtesy. And we've got a lawyer in the studio. He's not laughing. Anyway, I thought it wasn't too bad. Fran, why did the banana go to hospital? It wasn't peeling well. It's all in the timing. But keep them coming, and of course we'll reflect if they're better than the offerings at the Edinburgh Fringe. Let's move on to other matters now. Lincolnshire Police being criticised after a video of officers doing the Macarena dance during a Pride celebration in Lincoln City was then posted online. Let's take a look and listen in to them in action. Well, after witnessing that, members of the public went online to say they were rather angry at seeing officers dancing at the event rather than tackling threats to the community. But Lincolnshire's Chief Constable, Chris Howard, rejected that criticism, stating that policing is not just about enforcement and patrol, but about engagement, understanding and being part of the community. Well, Harry Miller is a former police officer and CEO of the Bad Law Project, an organisation working to challenge what it views as the politicisation of the UK's institutions, joins us now. Thanks very much for your time, Harry. I don't know if you've seen the clip, but a bit of fun or completely inappropriate? What's your view?
Look, we don't mind the police doing the time warp, the Macarena, or the floral dance. Just don't do it in uniform and don't do it in police time. It's as simple as that. It's simply not appropriate. I saw the comments of the Chief Constable, and this is absolutely typical of the police's attitude to the public at the moment. They simply do not like criticism. Any form of criticism on social media or anywhere else, they see this as evidence of homophobia, transphobia, bigotry, and hate. And weirdly, this then causes them to double down and go, well, you don't like the Macarena, we're going to do even more now because of the extent of bigotry that's out there. But the fact of the matter is, we don't want the police to be Pam's people. We want the police to be Peel's people, to serve with dignity, without fear and without favour.
But should we reflect that, given the circumstances, the event that they were at, obviously people were rather perhaps more relaxed and having a good time, and we don't obviously know whether the officers were instructed to do this or whether they just did it from their own volition?
Yeah, well, yeah, they were at a fun event, but it's a political event. Pride is political. Peter Tatchell says that Pride is political. Unison says that Pride is political. The fact of the matter is that Pride want to be more political, and it's simply not appropriate for the police to be at a political event as active participants. Sure, turn up, make sure that everybody has a good time, make sure that you uphold the law and keep the Queen's peace, but turn up in your uniform without rainbow epaulets, and for goodness sake, don't join in, because it makes you look political.
How therefore, do you get round the other criticism that sometimes police don't engage with the public and are seen as being perhaps a little too over-officious at these public events? It's a very difficult line to tread, isn't it?
No, it's not a difficult line to tread. What you do, you turn up in your best bib and tucker, you put a smile on your face, you talk to as many people as possible, you say hello, and all the rest of it. You act like a police officer. It doesn't mean you don't have to sell out and, you know, basically become a dancing troupe. That's not how you gain respect. You need to be there as a police officer, serving without fear and serving without favour. You can do that without doing the Macarena.
Harry, thank you very much indeed for your view. And, of course, we'll get plenty of views coming in from our viewers as well, no doubt on that. But let's see what Francis makes of it in the studio. Just remind you, Francis Hoare, barrister. I doubt whether we'd see the legal profession sort of throwing their wigs in the air and doing the shimmy and the shake in the courtrooms like the police.
No, probably not. I think that Harry's point is an important one, that what the police should not be is political. And in fact, Harry won a landmark legal case in the Court of, first in the High Court and then even more convincingly in the Court of Appeal recently, about police policing lawful comments that they found offensive, but which they didn't even suggest were a crime. And
political correctness.
But, it's specifically, it was a College of Policing policy that was found to be unlawful. And the point that Harry makes about not participating is an important one. So, of course, it's absolutely important that police officers should engage, that they should attend, that they'll be attending pride parades partly to police them and partly to show understanding and engagement. That's absolutely fine. But once you get beyond that, you do get them participating in and showing support for what are political events. And I mean, we also saw this in the XL protests, which were not just protests, but were the unlawful closing of Waterloo Bridge for 2 weeks. This was about 4 years ago, and police were seen dancing there. And that was more problematic still, because it was an unlawful protest. Whatever you think about environmental causes, police shouldn't be engaging in that kind of level of support. And this is a wider issue here, is that if you have police officers who routinely express support for political causes, it becomes far more difficult for them to be neutral when they are engaging
and particularly if they're making that decision on an individual basis. That's very difficult then to police, if you pardon the expression.
And there are unlawful offences, because if you, for example, threaten unlawful behaviour or do other sorts of things, then that can constitute a criminal offence. But judging whether or not an offence may have been committed, and justifying the investigation has to be made by an impartial officer. And when police officers do not demonstrate sufficient political neutrality, that's very problematic.
And we won't ask you to dance the Macarena. Francis, thank you as ever. Coming up, debating another big topic of the day, we're asking, are older people ignored in the UK? Well, Dame Esther Ranson now calling on the Tory leadership hopefuls Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to introduce a minister for older people to end what she calls the victimisation of the over 65s. And that joke about pasta taking top prize at the Edinburgh Fringe. We'll hear some of your best, or is it worst, one-liners. Get in touch, email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. First, the latest news headlines with Simon.
Thanks, Mark. It's 5:36. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Criminal barristers in England and Wales will stage an indefinite and uninterrupted strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out in alternate weeks in a dispute with the government over jobs, pay and legal aid funding. The new and all-out industrial action will start from the 5th of September. UK inflation is on course to breach 18% at the start of next year due to soaring energy bills. New forecasts by economists at Citi, an investment banking firm, are warning the consumer price index inflation will reach 18.6% in January, the highest rate for almost half a century. Last month, inflation hit a new 40-year high of 10.1%. The group also predicts the energy price cap will hit £4,500 in January. The Labour leader is calling on the next Prime Minister to make insulating homes a national mission amid the rising cost of energy. Sir Keir Starmer has set out plans to upgrade 19 million homes over the next decade. The party says their heat-saving project would save households £11 billion over 3 years. The chief medical advisor to US President Joe Biden is to step down from his position in December. Dr. Anthony Fauci will also end his post as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. In 2020, he became the face of the US government's efforts to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. And the England striker Ellen White has announced she is retiring from football with immediate effect. England striker Ellen White announced that she was part of the Euro 2022 winning squad and is the Lionesses' record goalscorer. The 33-year-old said on Twitter that the decision had been one of the hardest of her life, but that it was time to watch the next generation shine. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Brazier with Mark.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets then. The pound will buy you $1.176 and 1.183 euros. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,476 and 4 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin today. Now, lots of you getting in touch with your thoughts on the police dancing at the Pride Festival in Lincoln. Let's have a watch and a listen to remind ourselves of the video that went viral online. Well, that was them strutting their stuff at the Pride Festival in Lincoln. Williams reacted by saying the police can be part of the community by patrolling their community areas as this reduces crime. Dancing does nothing. While we've got this from Dam, who says it's terrible news that there's another killing from knife crime. However, sadly, this is no surprise with police officers dancing at Pride. The police need to get respect back for the uniform they wear and cut out the nonsense. Paul, how are people supposed to take the police seriously when they see them doing things like that? They're supposed to be keeping an eye out and keeping everyone safe. Keep your views coming, of course, and we'll reflect throughout the rest of the programme. But time now for a debate this hour. And journalist and broadcaster Dame Esther Ranson has accused both Tory leadership candidates of having totally ignored the needs of senior citizens. In her piece for the Daily Telegraph today, she called for a Minister for Older People to be appointed by the next leader to address issues such as housing and social care for the over 65s. So we're asking, are older people ignored in the UK? Well, we're joined, I'm glad to say, by Dame Esther and online editor of The Critic magazine, Sebastian Milbank. Thank you both for joining us. And Esther, first to you. You took the time to write for The Telegraph. Clearly, you believe very strongly about this. We always thought that, you know, the silver-haired generation were very important to the politicians because they're the ones that actually turn up and vote.
You might think so, mightn't you? And of course, there's been a lot of conversation about things like the triple lock pension and so on. But I have become so aware over the years, since the Silverline Helpline was launched back nationally in 2013, of the number of issues, social issues, which older people so often have to struggle with and yet are under the radar, nobody notices. I mean, not just loneliness and isolation, which is frightening and very bad for their health, but also things like being accused of bed blocking in hospitals, when in fact the only reason they overstay their time in hospital is because it's not safe for them to come home, because their homes are unsafe and there isn't enough social care. Why are their homes unsafe? They're accused of house blocking. But no, it's not that they want to stay in big, drafty, difficult to manage houses. It's because, unlike Australia and America, we're not building the right, appropriate homes for older people to move into to allow families to take over the big homes that otherwise older people have to stay in. There's so many issues like the digital switchover, which many older people are not comfortable with. They don't like the internet. They're frightened of the internet. They can't use the internet because they haven't got smartphones. And yet banking or landlines or trying to pay for your car parking fees are restricted to apps on smartphones. So many different areas. And what I'm calling for is someone to look holistically at what it's really like to live in Britain today if you're 65 plus.
Right, so sort of disenfranchised. Well, let's bring Sebastian in. And Sebastian, I know that previously you have said, well, actually, the elderly get quite a good deal in terms of their state pension now and the triple lock and so on and so forth. But do we actually value them enough?
Well, I think we don't. So that much is true. But I think that's a reflection of a general deterioration of social relations. And I mean, I don't think we can identify an entire generation as believing a single thing, but I don't think there's any question that the generation who are now in their 60s and 70s, the baby boomers, are definitely a big part of why we've ended up here. Now, that isn't about assigning blame. It isn't. I don't think there is a serious point here about taking a more holistic approach to older people. But I think we have to look at things like, we hear an awful lot about older people in politics. For example, we've raised loneliness. That's an important point, but it may interest you to know that baby boomers are the least lonely generation in Britain. The most lonely generation is my own, millennials. That's twice as lonely. I think something like 30% of millennials in 2019 couldn't name a single friend. The most likely people to be lonely amongst, based on housing, are renters. And the vast majority of older people own their own homes. And the vast majority of younger people don't. And I think there's a basic issue of justice there. And I don't think that appointing a minister whose sole job is to speak up for older people, why not have a minister for teenagers? Why not for middle-aged people? I don't think that's how we should.
Right. Well, let's put that back to Dame Esther. Clearly, there are lots of various groups who need different sort of approaches. But I think you pointed out that the two candidates, of course, to be leader of the Tory party and therefore Prime Minister, are in their 40s.
Absolutely, age 42 and age 47. And I have nothing against 40-year-olds. I don't know how old Sebastian is, but he looks to me as if he might be heading that way. My feeling is this. I've had experience in two areas. One is thinking about disabled people. When I spoke to someone called Alf Morris, who became Lord Morris, he was the first Minister for Disabled People.
Yeah.
And I asked him what he did, how he could improve quality of life for disabled people. He said, my title gave me a passport into the office of every single Secretary of State and Minister to say to them, when you are considering changes in legislation or changes in operation and the way life is lived, are you actually taking account of disabled people, offering them the potential, the accessibility they need? In other words, if we had in the minister for, the DCMS maybe, we had a minister for older people, that minister might have asked the people in telecommunications what difference it was going to make to older people to get rid of landlines based on copper and change them to the digital switchover, because that has isolated older people, many of them in rural areas where they haven't got mobile phone coverage, from 999 calls, from the pendants that offer alarms if they fall over. In other words, what I think I'm saying, Sebastian, is that the people making the decisions are literally unaware of the issues they are creating to isolate and maybe cause real dangers in the lives of older people.
Let's put that quickly to Sebastian in a moment. First, though, very quickly, Dame Esther, who would you actually appoint as minister? Do they have to be of the older generation? Ken Clarke, for instance, maybe?
Well, Ken Clarke is brilliant, obviously. He's in the House of Lords already. He's had a great deal of experience. And I don't know how interested he'd be in the welfare of older people. Something makes me feel that he's more interested in Brexit and the cost of living. I think you have to find someone. I mean, we've lost Sally Greengross, Baroness Greengross, and she was absolutely brilliant advocate for older people. You need someone who really responds and likes older people. You know, not
Right.
everybody in this country does.
OK, Sebastian, do you like older people and should they have an advocate?
I really like older people. I think they have an advocate, and I think Dame Esper is an extremely able one. I worry about that passport. I worry about that passport into ministers' offices, because what she's describing is not a minister, but a lobbyist. And that's a job that she does, and she does very well. And I'm glad she's doing it. But I'm just not sure that we should empower lobbyists, give them a ministerial brief, and give them a way into government. Because when you're the Home Secretary or the Education Secretary or any other Minister of State, you should be considering every single generation. You should be balancing interests. And the problem is with lobbyists is they have the luxury of not balancing interests. And if you create a minister who is literally answering to a special interest group, and I'm afraid over 65s are a special interest group in this country, then that corrupts the business of government. And we've seen a lot of creating tokenistic ministries in this country, and I think it's been a mistake.
OK, Sebastian, thank you for that. Last thought to you, Dame Esther. I mean, if we put you in the House of Lords, would you consider the job yourself, even as a lobbyist?
Pass. Do you think having a Secretary of State that looks after children, for example, in education and schools is a lobbyist? Do we think that the Commissioner for Children is a lobbyist? Well, they are an advocate. And I do think there are ministers that have to advocate for special interest groups if they're being ignored by the people making the decisions.
Right.
And that, I think, has happened to our older people.
Esther and Sebastian, we'll have to leave it there, but I think obviously this will be of interest to many watching, and we might get some views a little later, but thanks for that in our debate this afternoon. Thank you for your time. Now, a new documentary on the police investigations into Princess Diana's death has aired ahead of the 25th anniversary, would you believe, of the crash that killed her. The documentary claiming that a note which predicted the circumstances of her death was not passed to French investigators until 6 years after. It also alleges that Diana's brothers and sisters only found out about this note more than a decade after it was written. Well, royal commentator and biographer Angela Levin joins us now in the studio. Angela, as ever, thank you for being with us. This is the so-called Mishcon note. Just remind us of what could have been said at the various inquiries, if that was known.
Well, I think that anything that comes up very late changes the whole mood and the angle of the inquiry. And I think it's taken maybe up to today and last night when I saw the first episode to actually take a step back and look at it and see and try to understand it.
And this is where she predicted her own death, that something untoward was going to happen to her.
Yes, I think that was part of her changing moods. I don't actually...
Well, I was going to ask you, was this part of the makeup where we're now learning what happened with Martin Bashir and, of course, her brother, indicating that there were lots of things being said to her that weren't necessarily true?
Yes, I think that all these gathered, and that she was very temperamental and very unwell mentally at the time.
Yeah.
And so she was frightened because she thought that Prince William was being captured by these people and asked to tell things and told not to. Her
and he had a listening
officers,
device in his watch, I think. That was one of the other things, wasn't it?
Her protection officers were all believed to earn money from the government to try and watch her. And Prince Philip and the Queen were also accused. But it was all a sort of a sort of mess, really.
So what do you make then of yet another documentary going through, as we do with the Kennedy killing, the assassination, all the conspiracy theories? I mean, obviously for a documentary maker, they know it's going to sell, but do we actually learn anything new?
Well, I felt that it was wrong to do that. I thought we should have compassion for the Queen and the family because
and the two sons,
and particularly for William and Harry, and even more for William because Harry sort of tried to take his mother for himself now. She's always watching him and helping him, where he said, you know, he's finished with William because she showed him what to do. So it's very, very painful. However, watching it, it's done almost like, well, it is a piece of history, and you're given all the information, mainly in French with subtitles, the people who were there at the time. It's very serious, and it's done sensibly so far.
Yeah. Francis with us in the studio as well. I mean, there are still perhaps perhaps outstanding questions as well in terms of a criminal investigation. The white Fiat Uno, never traced. Driver was never found. All the reports of a big white light in the tunnel before the crash, never actually pinned down as to what happened. Was there a lack of, shall we say, rigour in the French investigation, do you think?
If there was in the French investigation, there most certainly wasn't in the inquest. I actually remember this because my flatmate at the time was a junior barrister on the inquiry, actually acting for the Ritz in Paris. And in the end, the investigation, the inquest found so little evidence to support the conspiracy that was relied on things like the Fiat Uno and the white light, that the jury were not even able to consider it because there was so little evidence it couldn't possibly justify it. It was an exhaustive investigation. Witnesses were called about all of those issues, the so-called lack of the inability to find the Fiat Uno or identify the light are not uncommon things in these sorts of investigations. But
can't prove it, can you?
Enormous. Well, you can never prove to a certainty that something didn't happen.
Yes.
But what you can do is, and what the legal process should do, if it isn't a criminal legal process, is prove to the balance of probabilities what is the most likely outcome. But this came as close as it possibly could to proving beyond reasonable doubt. It could not possibly be one of those sort of conspiracies.
But still makes telly. Angela, as ever, thank you for joining us and bringing us your view, and Francis as well with that. But let's just finish off with a pasta pun, because it's been awarded the title of the funniest joke at this year's Edinburgh Fringe, beating 9 others making the shortlist. And I think I might just bring that to you. I tried to steal spaghetti from the shop, but the female guard saw me and I couldn't get pasta. Anyway, you've been bringing some better one-liners, perhaps. Stan, why did the pie cross the road? Because he was meeting potato. Terry, what do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? A stick. Steve, I have an irrational fear of German sausages. I fear the Wurst. Yes. Joe says, 2 cannibals eating a clown. One says to the other, does that taste funny to you? That's a good one. Old but good. Tony, I met my wife on a supermarket dating site. Yep, I got a bag for life. Oh, ouch. Oh, yes. Right, you're going to have trouble when you get back at tea time. Francis, have you got one for us?
I've got a man goes into a solicitor's office or an attorney's office that's in the States. And he says, how much do you charge? And the attorney says, $100. And he says, oh, that's a lot. And the attorney says, yes. And what's your third question? Oh, I won't put you on the spot, Angela. But
thank you.
Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for your jokes. Thank you for your views. You've been with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin. We're back again at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Up next, Dubes & Co. First, the latest weather.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A bit of a mishmash out there today. Some places having a bit of evening sunshine, but most staying fairly cloudy. Rain and drizzle here and there. Quite warm and humid, particularly in the south. Tucked in between these two weather fronts, quite a lot of warm and humid air as it's cooler conditions further north. But these weather fronts are bringing a lot of cloud. They've brought some outbreaks of rain and still some heavier bursts of rain this evening over the Midlands, drifting over northeast England. A bit of showery rain too, crossing Scotland, but turning drier in the west, at least for a time. A few showers overnight moving across Northern Ireland. It's going to be quite a warm, humid night with temperatures in towns and cities holding up generally in the mid-teens. So quite a warm, humid start to Tuesday. Again, it's a fairly messy picture, but most of England and Wales will start dry, and for many, there'll be some morning sunshine. Zone of cloud drifting across Scotland with some outbreaks of rain. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, but mostly here it's dry and fine. And the cloud then thickening for Wales and southwest England with some heavier bursts of rain moving in here to end the day. But much of the eastern side of England will stay dry, not much rain here. And quite warm and humid in the sunny spells. Temperatures getting into the mid-20s at least. Some heavier showers then drifting across the Midlands through Tuesday evening. Again, largely missing East Anglia in the southeast, and then another zone of rain developing and spreading into parts of England and Wales for Wednesday. Some uncertainty about the exact position of this rain band, but it could be quite a wet day for parts of South Wales and parts of southwest England on Wednesday. A few showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, but also some good spells of sunshine here. East Anglia in the southeast looking dry on Wednesday and really quite warm temperatures. Could get into the high 20s in places. Cooler conditions for Scotland and Northern Ireland. The outlook is still rather messy with low pressure nearby, some showers, this weather front moving through, but signs of high pressure bringing drier weather for most of us into the weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.